Good afternoon. Good afternoon. I'm John Harwood. I'm pastor of St. Mark's. I'm thrilled to see half of Lewistown here this afternoon. When I heard the original proposal for a topic, I said, nah, nobody will ever want to come to that. And we have a standing room audience. We've never had this room so full before. This is going to be a great program. I'll ask Forrest Fisher to introduce the speaker, and then we'll get started. Just a word, we do have a restroom just down the hall, and please use it as you need to. Thank you for coming.
Thank you, John. And I'd like to welcome everyone. My name is Forrest Fisher. I'm the current president of the Mifflin County Historical Society. Welcome to this first event of 2026, celebrating the U.S. semi-quincentennial. A word certainly destined for a crossword puzzle. Before we get started, I would like to extend the Society's and the community's thanks to St. Mark's Episcopal Church for hosting this event and for other events in the past, but today, especially for this one. Father John Harwood, who you just heard from, and his loyal volunteers, including Hal Jenkinson, who I've been in touch with when we had to postpone over our little snow event. Please give the church a round of applause at this time. Thank you, John. Today we open this 250th anniversary year with the story of a truly historical individual who lived here before, during, and after the American Revolution. Our speaker, Cate Barron, was in grade school at Buchanan Elementary in the 1960s.
Any other Buchanan grads out here?
Buchanan grads, there we go. Anyone here who did their student teaching at Buchanan? Yes, there are some Buchanan Elementary representatives here. And it was there that Cate first heard about the school's namesake, frontier pioneer, Dorcas Buchanan. Cate returns here today to her hometown, delighted to share what she's learned since her elementary days about the founding mother of Lewistown. Allow me a few words about Cate. Cate's 40-year career in journalism got its start behind the microphone at WMRF Radio, just up the street. She then spent several years with the Sentinel as a reporter before heading down the Narrows to Harrisburg, and a career with the Patriot News and PennLive.com. In 2012, the newsroom she led as managing editor won the Pulitzer Prize for coverage of the Jerry Sandusky scandal. She retired in 2023 as publisher. Cate is in the Pennsylvania News Media Hall of Fame and recently received its Lifetime Achievement Award. In addition to her diploma from Lewistown High School, the Georgetown University grad has a master's from Penn State. She and her husband, Bob Vucic, is here with us today, both live in Camp Hill. She visits family in Mifflin County every chance she gets. Everyone, please enjoy the life and times of Dorcas Buchanan. It is my distinct honor and pleasure to introduce Cate Barron.
Overwhelmed at the turnout for something that started out kind of as a hobby for me 9 months ago. But it's been a fascinating dive into our local history and what a proud heritage Lewistown has. As Dorcas Buchanan's haunts. It's truly amazing. The more I dug, the more I was intrigued by her story. First of all, Happy America 250 and Happy Women's History Month, so we get the double team this. It really is an honor to be here. Thank you so much. I'm going to sit down so I can read my script and flip and use the wonderful PowerPoint, thank you, and the laser pointer and see if I can do everything all at one time. So here we go. As many of you know, Dorcas Armstrong Buchanan lived through all the pivotal events of the 18th century in frontier America. She braved the wilderness with her large family. She faced down violence, especially during the French and Indian War, and she witnessed the Revolution. She became a shrewd tradeswoman and landowner who bartered with the Shawnee and Lenape. Truly amazing. She did it in their language. And I'd like to say, I say this often, she smashed the glass ceiling when it was made out of logs. As far as we know, Dorcas left no letters or diaries. This is what made research on her pretty hard, and I think why it hasn't really been attempted in super in-depth before. She does show up in a handful of court documents and church registries from the 1700s, and what I've done is try to piece her story together with that material, relying on original source materials, local histories, and family lore from the Armstrongs and the Buchanans, and there are a lot of them still in Pennsylvania. I'm hearing from them every day now, so it's pretty exciting. My very wise old Sentinel editor, Jim McClure, who's way back in the back, said start with the obit, and so I did. And sure enough, a very long obituary for Dorcas ran in the Western Star newspaper of Lewistown when she died in 1804. It's full of sketchy information, though. It has some really glaring omissions. It doesn't mention her husbands, doesn't really mention many of her children, but it is a contemporary account of her life, and a lot of what I talk about today is based on that obit. By the way, it was picked up in papers all around Pennsylvania. I saw it in the Oracle of Dauphin, which is a wonderful newspaper name for a paper that had been up in Harrisburg. I think there was one in Bloomsburg, and I think Shippensburg, and Altoona. So by the time she died, she was already on her way to becoming a legend. And she's our legend, so it's just so good. Let's start. Dorcas Armstrong was born around 1711 in Monaghan, Ireland. It's up in Northern Ireland. It was at a time when tens of thousands of Scots-Irish were emigrating to the colonies. What did they want? They wanted cheap and plentiful land, and they wanted the religious freedom that they could get here. They were especially drawn to William Penn's Pennsylvania because of its tradition of peaceful relations and fair trading with Native Americans. Well, according to genealogies, Dorcas arrived in America around 1730 with her parents, her husband Henry Holt, and their baby son. But the stories passed down by her family over generations tell a much more romantic story. It's something that could have been an Outlander. It's just amazing. So I'll share that with you. It's too good not to share. According to legend, Dorcas was a teenager when she fell in love with Henry Holt, whose wealthy family had estates in London and Ireland. I included this painting of his uncle. This is what she was up against. This kind of incredibly dignified, incredibly landed gentry here. His uncle, by the way, was a kind of the Britain's Supreme Court's Chief Justice. It was that level of authority. Henry was Oxford educated, and he was crazy about a beautiful girl who, all accounts say, could not read or write. His family, the Holts, disapproved and plotted to what they called spirited her away from Ireland. She was kidnapped, according to family legend, and put on a ship sailing to America. Now, the reality is there were hundreds of ships sailing that 8-week passage every year in the early 1700s. And kidnapping to the colonies was actually a pretty common practice for getting rid of enemies and unwanted relatives. So there might be some truth in this. You have to guess. When Henry discovered she was gone, he set sail to find her, according to family legend. They were reunited and wed. It's a really dramatic story. Unfortunately, it's impossible to verify, but I wanted to share it because it is so classic. What we do have evidence for is Dorcas was in her late teens and Henry Holt around 28 when they married. 3 of their children survived infancy. Their second son, Thomas, was actually baptized in Christ Church, which is a famous Revolutionary War church still in operation in Philadelphia. The family first went to Lancaster, then they moved on to Carlisle, where reports are Henry became a silversmith. Carlisle, Chambersburg, and Shippensburg were very much frontier outposts in the 1730s. Take a look at this map. I mean, we're right there, you know. It was right between the British-owned colonies, what they call here the disputed territory, and then all the French territory to the west. So we were so, this is one thing that amazed me, we were so in the thick of it here in this area during the French and Indian War. I had no idea. Land-hungry settlers were fueling tensions with the Shawnee and especially the Lenni Lenape. That was a tribe also known as the Delaware. You might have heard that name. Decades of peaceful coexistence with William Penn were over, and so there was a lot of tension boiling on the frontier. Well, 5 years into their marriage, Henry disappears. A couple theories. He might have been ambushed by a war party. He might have been trying to claim his inheritance back home and the ship went down. Or maybe he just had it with frontier life. It was not easy and decided he was gonna leave. We don't know. No one knows, but that's what's been tossed out there. What we do know is 1735 was a really difficult year for Dorcas Holt. Around the same time that Henry vanished, she lost a newborn baby boy. That same year, I found this really fascinating, Lancaster court records show that she was charged with assaulting a neighbor. Dorcas testified the man had been abusing his wife, who was her friend. Dorcas got off with a fine. The man was ordered to be of good behavior to his spouse. And I felt that this really fit the popular description of Dorcas Buchanan as a high-spirited, determined woman full of energy and fire. So, no surprise, Dorcas remarries 3 years after Henry disappears. Her new spouse was Arthur Buchanan. He was a Lancaster merchant and a fur trader. He was also from Ireland and Scots-Irish. Buchanan and his brothers were among the Susquehanna Valley's earliest settlers. Arthur knew this backcountry very well. He'd spotted the Juniata Valley for its very prime hunting and trapping lands and had kept it in the back of his mind for many years. His older brother, Robert, was High Sheriff of Lancaster, and Arthur rode with several posses before he married Dorcas. A sheriff's job included back then seizing property from colonists who owed debts. As you can imagine, this was really hazardous duty, and more than once Arthur was badly beaten during a posse run. In 1736, Arthur also helped apprehend Thomas Cressop. He was the scrappy leader of a group of Marylanders that were locked in a territorial dispute with Pennsylvanians down around York and Lancaster County. Court records show that Arthur took part in a day-long standoff at Cressop's home near Wrightsville. After a shootout, the posse burned the cabin and arrested Cressop. The prisoner was shackled, and Robert Buchanan escorted him to jail in Philadelphia. That border dispute, I just mentioned it as kind of a sidebar, it wasn't settled until the Mason-Dixon line was drawn 30 years later. It was that rough. Meanwhile, Dorcas was taking a gamble that her new spouse wouldn't live up to the terrible reputation that frontier traders had. They were described by one historian as rascally fellows full of lies and treachery. Traders lived on a knife's edge between riches and ruin. Arthur himself, I found this out, had been in and out of jail over bad debts. But we have evidence that he had to have some means, because when they married, we found a bond from 1738. It bears his signature. Look at this. Right there. Arthur Buchanan. Thank you, I'm liking that. Under an agreement to pay the government 500 pounds in gold if his union with Dorcas would fall through. Such bonds were used to discourage sham marriages back in colonial days, And a historian in Carlisle mentioned to me, she thought it was a precautionary move, and just what if Henry would turn back up, right? Over the next 16 years, the Buchanans lived in Lancaster and then Carlisle. Accounts vary, but documents show at least 4 sons and a daughter were born. Counting her 3 surviving Holt children, that makes for a blended family of at least 8 kids. The genealogy tables are all over the place with different children, but I could pin down at least 8. Arthur was always on the lookout for business opportunities, and now he had the perfect partner. So they moved to Carlisle. In 1751, he got a grant for land there, and he built a 2-story log house that was used as a tavern on East High Street. There's nothing there now, it's just there's an industrial building that's long gone. The family was probably in the business of tavern running for many years before then. In fact, Arthur had been fined several times for running an unlicensed, what they called a tippling house. This is Dorcas's plot. This is a map that Mary Buchanan, the historian I mentioned to you, drew of all the early property owners in Carlisle. There's the square, if you're familiar with Carlisle. This had been Arthur's. It was then turned over to Dorcas. And over here, this double lot was Arthur's nephew's house and tavern. Much more substantial. It was made out of stone as opposed to logs. And I believe part of it you can still see today. I think his name was William, I believe. Okay. Meanwhile, talk about the tavern in Carlisle. The Buchanans were well matched in industriousness, and these two were risk takers. So, July 1754, the Iroquois Confederacy sells most of its land west of the Susquehanna to the colony of Pennsylvania. Arthur saw opportunity. The Buchanans left for the Juniata Valley the very next month. Arthur and Dorcas, just an aside, they really seem to fit that Scots-Irish profile as people who valued fierce independence and self-reliance. And someone told me this old saying that if a Scots-Irishman can see the smoke from his neighbor's chimney, things are getting too crowded and it's time to move. Arthur apparently enjoyed a good reputation among the Native Americans that he traded with as a trapper. He'd gotten to know Chief Kishiquillis, familiar name around here, who'd lived in the Shawnee village of Ohessen, right where we said, on the Juniata River. This friendship would serve the Buchanans well. Ohessen, the village that would become Lewistown, as we all know, housed about 20 Shawnee families and about 60 warriors back in 1754 when they made their trip here. A growing number of Lenape were also living there, and this Indian nation had been cheated out of eastern lands by the British and were moving farther inland, and they weren't happy. The area was still part of Cumberland County. We were talking about this earlier with some people here. Mifflin County wouldn't be carved out of Cumberland until 1789. That's why I did most of my research in Carlisle at the courthouse and their really wonderful archives in Carlisle. Okay. It took several days on hard, dangerous trails to get to Ohessen from Carlisle in the 1700s. The Buchanans would get to know several routes very well. One would take the Great Road north from Carlisle, right past 2 blocks from our house, you can see a little marker, up to the Susquehanna River, and then up the Juniata. That took about 5 days if you really had everything going for you. It avoided mountains, but it carried a high risk of ambush in what was called the Long Narrows. Dorcas is believed to be the first European woman to make that passage by canoe. This route, Fort Granville Road, was 35 miles overland between Carlisle and Lewistown. It took 3 days. It was very hard going up the mountains and down. It crossed 3 mountains, in fact. You had to ford 6 streams and a river. It came to be known as the Fort Granville Road. It was heavily traveled by the indigenous, by traders and settlers. This map was found after, we'll get to the Fort Granville story in a couple minutes, but no one knows who drew this. It might have been a guy named George Croghan, who was a surveyor and was responsible for a lot of the forts during the French and Indian War around here. When the family arrived at Ohessen, Arthur obtained 200 acres along Kish Creek from the Lenape chief, Tiwia. Buchanan called him Captain Jacobs. He was named after a burly German that Arthur knew in Carlisle. The name stuck. And we'll hear it again. At first, Jacobs was really reluctant to sell any land to the Buchanans, but historians believe that Arthur probably persuaded him with tobacco, trinkets, and of course rum. Arthur built a log tavern and trading post at what's now our Main and Water Streets, one block away. But Jacobs grew angry as he watched more Scots-Irish arrive after the Buchanans. The chief and his followers destroyed their own settlement under the cover of darkness and took off. This was not a good sign. Captain Jacobs would join forces with the French and lead a series of very violent raids against colonists in the next few years. While Arthur was an experienced woodsman in the backcountry, just imagine, this is what I tried to visualize, because I've done this trip so many times from between Camp Hill and Lewistown, but imagine how scary and frightening it would have been for Dorcas and her kids. I mean, Arthur knew it. She didn't. She was just putting her faith in this man and going with them. But she rose from her challenge, and this is my first, I think, really worthwhile quote from her obit. With a spirit of enterprise, honorable in a man, but more so in a woman, she fearlessly settled down among the Shawnee and Delaware. By her courteous and friendly behavior, she secured the love and esteem of her Indian neighbors. Dorcas became fluent in Shawnee and Lenape, and this was no easy feat. Those languages, I'm told, are extremely difficult to learn. In fact, nouns and verbs are based on age and gender, and the Lenape, for example, have 10 words for bear. In addition to raising the kids, helping with the tavern, cooking and gardening, and 1,000 other duties, Dorcas harvested game to put food on the table. Her legendary hunting skills captured the imagination of 20th century folklorist Henry Shoemaker. This guy was actually really, really famous, and he's pretty interesting in his own. It's a whole other presentation. I wouldn't bore you, but Shoemaker romanticized most of the stories that he collected around Pennsylvania, but he could spin a really good yarn. He was inspired by the stories passed down over the generations about our pioneer, who he described as a sprightly, handsome woman. He told a tale about a summer evening when Dorcas was sewing by an open window. When a wolf appeared, she picked up the rifle, always by her side, and rammed the barrel down the animal's throat. Dorcas had at least 50 deer to her credit, with trophy racks covering her bake oven, according to Shoemaker. But the pioneer didn't like to shoot her prey. She preferred to drown them. And you can see this clipping I got from, I think this was from the Public Opinion. Shoemaker could lecture all over the state because he was the state's historian and folklorist. Shoemaker would entertain audiences with a tale about the time Dorcas saw dogs chasing a big bull elk into Jack's Creek. She plunges into the water, she struggles with the beast, drowning it while boys on the banks are yelling, "Go Dorky!" True or fiction, it's for you to decide. I'm also going to warn you, and Forrest knows this really well, this feat has also been credited to her granddaughter, innkeeper Dorcas Stackpole of McVaytown. So you have to decide just how much is reality there. Okay. 1754, the year the Buchanans got to Ohessen was really perilous on the frontier. A British expedition in Fayette County, led by 22-year-old George Washington, touched off a 7-year war with the French and their allies. The French and Indian War would cost 11,000 lives. By the way, I knew nothing about the French and Indian War until I got into this, but Dorcas brings it out in you. Pennsylvania's backcountry was a focal point. Many tribes, angered by fraudulent British land deals, sided with the French. And this was interesting. At one point, the Algonquins and the French controlled much of the region from Perry County up to Sunbury. Violence escalated in 1755 after General Braddock was killed attempting to capture Fort Duquesne at the modern-day location of Pittsburgh. Hundreds of settlements were abandoned. Terrified colonists fled east. According to her obit, the Buchanans left their home 5 times on the advice of Kishiquillis and his Shawnee. The Shawnee that Kishiquillis led were relatively neutral during the war. During one narrow escape, the family headed east down to Juniata. They were camped 5 miles below what today's Mifflin Town when Dorcas saw a group of warriors loading plunder from other pioneer settlements into their canoes. Again, grain of salt, but I got this from the obit. Dorcas immediately demanded they return the settlers' goods and began to take their loot. According to her obit, one warrior raised his tomahawk above her and threatened to fell her to the earth if she didn't stop. Well, of course, our heroine refused, and she spiritedly told him it was beneath a warrior to dye his weapon in the blood of a woman. The war party surrendered. So great was their attachment to her and the veneration in which she was held. Take it with a grain of salt, but there is a theme that runs through her life that she really did work to make connections with the indigenous in the area, which is so good. Okay. During one of the Buchanan's escapes to Carlisle, Arthur reopened his tavern on High Street. You can hear the desperation in his license application. And this is one of the very few times we have Arthur's voice speaking to us over all these many years. It read, "Your petitioner was drove to this town by savage cruelties with loss of his total effects. Fleeing for the preservation of their lives, he was rendered unable to support his numerous family without falling into some business. Your petitioner prays your honors will grant him a license to retail beer and cider." The photo is from a place called the Conakajig Institute. It's in southern Franklin County. It's a wonderful day trip if you've never been down there. They've moved some actual log cabins from other parts of Pennsylvania there, and you can go through it. This is their tavern. They do a lot of reenactments. They have a whole farm going. There are a lot of animals that date back to colonial days, not the animals, but the breed. And it's a really wonderful trip. Carlisle was a bustling refugee center during the French and Indian War. Historians describe it as having an infamous reputation as a disorderly place. You think of it now, it's like, Arthur got his license and he no doubt saw that business was brisk. There were times of joy for Dorcas and her family. In 1756, her son Thomas Holt married Elizabeth Mitchell at St. James Episcopal Church in Lancaster, which I believe is still in operation. Yep. Thank you. The bride was the granddaughter of a Carlisle shopkeeper, Elizabeth Ross. And I like to picture Dorcas and Elizabeth at the reception swapping tales about running businesses, balancing family, and everything else on the frontier. In the middle of the war, Dorcas and Arthur returned to Ohesson, which was now called Old Town. They were prepared to wait out any danger in Fort Granville. This was a new military stockade that was built a mile from their home. I still have to get up to that site. Arthur had helped supply the fort, but it was considered sorely undermanned for the task of protecting the frontier. Once again, the Shawnee warned that they wouldn't be safe. The family fled to Carlisle instead. That August, French soldiers and warriors burned down the fort, killing its officer in charge, who we think might have been an Armstrong cousin. The warriors were led by Captain Jacobs. Jacobs was quoted as saying he could take any fort that would catch fire and would make peace with the English when they had learned him to make gunpowder. 1 month later, Jacobs was killed in a British raid on Cate. He was smoked out of his cabin, scalped, and his head was carried to Philadelphia, where officers got a reward of 600 pounds. Violent stuff, really. By the end of 1756, some 3,000 settlers had been killed or captured during the war. That year saw several incursions in the Juniata Valley, including the massacre of 13 members of the Sheridan family living in Sherman's Creek. The pacifist Quakers were slow to respond for constant pleas for protection. They lost control of Pennsylvania government due to that. The Buchanans stayed in Carlisle for the duration of the war. Arthur was 58 when he died there in 1760. He would have only spent a few months, in his Juniata Valley home. In other words, Arthur got her here, but she stayed. After Arthur died, the governor sent condolences to his sons, What about Dorcas? You know, it's just amazing. Cumberland County records show that Arthur died without a will. Dorcas was listed as executor of his estate. Okay, here we go. In 1762, Arthur's land here in Old Town was warranted in his widow's name, making Dorcas Buchanan the first woman to own property in what today is Mifflin County. Now in her early 50s, she would gather her courage once again and make the trip from Carlisle to here. I mean, think about what a brave and bold decision was that. My gosh, she was chased out so many times before, lived with that constant fear of attack for many years up here in the far reaches of the frontier. She was leaving the safety and the comfort of Carlisle, which was fortified and had a lot of troops in it. Her home in Carlisle, when they did the inventory to sell it, it had 6 feather beds and a looking glass, among other possessions. So it sounds like it was pretty nice. She did, however, as we all know, return to Old Town. She managed the store and tavern, and by many accounts became a successful tradeswoman, a rarity in colonial America. The once illiterate teen from Ireland was now managing land holdings that she grew from 200 to 300 acres, right around here, in the heart of Lewistown. 5 Buchanan children and her son Thomas Holt also applied for land around Old Town. Here we go. This is one I was able to track down 3 Dorcas Buchanan signatures on documents up in Carlisle with the help of Mary Lucian, and here's one of them. See it right there. Each signature, she spells her name a little differently. In fact, there's one, and Mary Lou's convinced that these are legitimate signatures, that they, you know, if she couldn't have written it, they would just let her have, you know, draw an X. But they talk, one of them is spelled D-A-R-C-H-A-U-S, and Mary Lou says it's because this woman would have had a pretty thick Irish accent, and it's Dorcas, you know, is how she would have said her name. Anyway, pretty interesting stuff. Dorcas was still settling Arthur's estate 3 years after his death. The family sold the Carlisle property on High Street. That inventory is pretty lengthy, but some of the highlights: china cups, punch bowls, and 50 gallons of whiskey. In the 18th century, taverns also functioned as inns, general stores, post offices, and town halls. During wartime, they were recruitment centers and the first place to go for news from the front. Well, England won the French and Indian War and seized France's North American properties. But the violence soon rocked the frontier again during Pontiac's rebellion, when the indigenous revolted in the face of harsh new British land policies. Dorcas and her family fled to Carlisle again when the rebellion reached a peak. But 2 years later, which would have been 1768, she returned to Old Town for good. Her children were living all around her. Arthur Jr. and Thomas Holt were very active in local affairs. Their signatures can be found on a petition against dividing Derry Township into smaller municipalities. Dorcas would need their help. When she was 55, she reportedly suddenly went blind. This could have been, Forrest and I have been speculating on this, from scarlet fever or diphtheria or even the measles. They were all in epidemics in colonial America, and all could cause temporary vision loss. According to her obit, her sight returned 23 years later. You can't make this up, right? But this seems like it's very verified. This had been foretold, the legend goes, by Chief Logan. The Mingo leader lived on Kish Creek when he was young and would visit this area often in his later years. This was an actual, Chief Logan became quite esteemed. There's a long story about how his family was killed, and he recited a lament for how he'd always been friends with the colonists, and yet they turned on him and killed his family. And this is an ad for a steamship company that used his name. That's just the esteem that people held Chief Logan in. He was very close to the Buchanans. This is from the obituary again. When Arthur Jr. brought Chief Logan home one day, Logan approached Dorcas. Holding his hand on her neck, he exclaimed, "My sister, you will see yet. You will live to be a very old woman." Well, Logan's predictions proved accurate. Dorcas regained her sight and lived to be 92. During the Revolutionary War, Old Town was a patriot stronghold and a military hub. Troops from here would be sent to the fight in Quebec, New Jersey, and eastern Pennsylvania. Dorcas's sons and 2 or 3 grandsons all served. Arthur Jr. commanded 8 companies as a colonel in Cumberland's 5th Battalion. Tragedy struck home in 1777 when her son, Robert, accidentally shot his half-brother, Thomas Holt. According to several accounts, Holt was killed during militia target practice just a few blocks from his home. I just imagine, like, here's Dorcas, she's sitting there blind in her house, and they come home and they tell her what happened. Oh. Much of Arthur Jr.'s later service in the Revolution centered on protecting settlers around here from war parties that were siding with the British. In 1778, he refused a request for more troops to head east. He wrote his superior officer, quote, "The Indians continue to murder men, women, and children on our frontiers, and you didn't answer a call to help with that war. Sir, please send a supply of ammunition and arms." When he wasn't at war, Arthur Jr. was a constable in Derry Township, and no doubt helped with the tavern. Travelers' letters called the place the Bounding Elk. We believe this is a Mifflin County Historical Society postcard from their collection. This had been a log tavern that was then boarded over with weatherboarding. So supposedly the logs are underneath here. Too bad we can't go up there and see it. After the war, Dorcas lived with Arthur and 4 of his children. His household also included 1 Negro. According to the 1780 Pennsylvania Slave Registry, remember, slavery was still legal in the colonies until later in the 1700s. I was kind of stunned to find that out. The registry listed about 300 enslaved people living in Cumberland County, which this area still was. That same year, Pennsylvania passed the Gradual Abolition Act. This was the first step in outlawing slavery in the Commonwealth. In 1788, Dorcas transferred her land to Arthur Jr., possibly to ease his financial difficulties. If you look in court documents, you'll see that a local woman won judgment against him for debts, and he was forced to sell property that had been his mother's. In 1790, the tract went up at sheriff's sale and was subdivided into the lots that make up downtown Lewistown. The Buchanan Tavern remained in operation at least into the late 1700s. In 1789, it was the site of the first session of Mifflin County Court, when the county was formed. Notes from that session, they're in the basement of the new courthouse, still called the new courthouse. And Commissioner Postal showed Jenny and I the collection in the basement, and behind a big vault. It was wonderful, and there they are. There are records from that session. Thank you, Paul Postal. Okay, her final chapter. According to an Armstrong family blog, George Washington visited Dorcas in 1794. Now, I am still looking into this. I can't seem to get it pinned down, but she may have met him during his week-long stay in Carlisle that fall. The president was mustering troops to quell the Whiskey Rebellion and met a lot of townspeople. And I don't think it's too far-fetched to imagine he wouldn't have wanted to meet this American pioneer who at that time was 82. I think it very much could have happened. We do have stronger documents and evidence that he met with Arthur Jr. at a house on Walnut Bottom Road outside of Carlisle as Washington headed for Points West. Dorcas Buchanan died in January of 1804, respected, her obit said, by all who knew her. And what an iron constitution. The average life expectancy in colonial America was about 40 years maximum. And this is a woman who'd given birth to many children. She cheated death several times, especially during the French and Indian War. She coped with blindness, and she made it into her 90s. Arthur Jr. died 3 years after his mother. He was in the Long Narrows coming back from a trip to Carlisle. They're both buried in Old Town Cemetery. Dorcas, Arthur, and this is a grandson. Dorcas's final resting place may have been lost to history had it not been for 2 men visiting Lewistown 30 years after her death. Yet another amazing story about this woman. Dorcas had been buried in an unmarked grave. Hearing about her adventures, the two young strangers, as they were described, wanted to honor her. Local history says they hauled sandstone from Shade Mountain and carved the headstone you can see today. She lies between Arthur Jr. and grandson Robert Buchanan. The crude lettering misspells her name. In 1934, the cemetery was dedicated to Dorcas and to Mifflin County historian George Freisinger. It was recently restored, and really, my hat's off to this wonderful community effort here. I know Dorcas would have been proud. I'm hoping some of us will take a walk over to the cemetery after this and pay our respects to Lewistown's amazing founding mother. But meanwhile, I just want to thank you for having this opportunity to share a really new hobby of mine. I want to thank Forrest, Mifflin County Historical Society, Father Harwood and St. Mark's, my sister Jenny for putting all this together. So thank you very much for listening. We have a little bit of time for questions. Any questions from all that to wade through?
You may have already said this, but how old was she when she regained her sight?
Well, they said she lost it when she was 55, and she got it back 23 years later, so that makes her 70 years.
Where exactly was her store?
We think it was where the Lewistown Hotel was. That's how I best identified her. Yeah, like a block away. Yeah. And it's interesting to me that corner stayed in hospitality all the way through the years. But again, the postcard, which people think was her place, it doesn't look like it because it had the siding on it, but I'd just love to have known if there were logs underneath. Anybody else? Dorcas question. How many learned about her in grade school? Are they still doing that? Yeah, me too. But no idea. And I have no idea that the French and Indian War actually had more impact in a way on this area than the Revolution, because the Revolution was all fought, farther east of here. So I thought the French and Indian War was something that we probably don't pay enough attention to. Yes?
How many descendants in this room from Dorcas?
Any Dorcas relations in the room? Please stand up. Please stand up. Thank you. I've got a bunch of material off here. They have several Facebook pages going. There's one that the Armstrongs run. There's one dedicated to Dorcas. It's been a post of material which I've just scratched the surface on this. I want to go back and talk to relatives and do some more digging into files. And I don't know, there's just so much more we can do with this. But anyway, any other questions?
Will you come back again after you do the additional research?
Be happy to. Thank you. Thank you. If you'll promise to come.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Who would you choose to play her in a movie?
My husband has the perfect person.
Blind clothes.
It sounds like something out of Outlander. It's some of it is so unbelievable, but there's enough basis to it that what a life. It's truly amazing. Anybody else?
Do you have any description of her physical appearance at all, or?
No. Early historians from the 1900s, they kept talking about how she was beautiful, she was feisty, they used all those adjectives, but we don't. I wish we did. And nothing in her voice. We had a little bit of Arthur's voice, which I shared today, and that's been the big limitation to this. You want to know how, but then you figure out she was in trouble when she was younger, and that just shows how determined she was, and just the courage to come over the mountains. My husband and I actually tried to drive the Granville Road from Carlisle, not quite that far, but anyway, up over the mountains past Sherman's Creek, and oh my gosh, just imagine, it would have been a dirt road, not too wide. They probably had some wagons with them, and then all those kids that she had to shepherd, and the kids all had to tote gear. And then I've been diving into a lot of early American literature and histories, and there's some incredibly detailed letters that describe the fear that these settlers had when there were such uprisings going on around here, and that they slept with their rifles by their sides, And, I know some of the houses had little slits they could poke through and shoot when they had to, if they were being attacked. And really, so the bravery to live through this and to keep coming back here was just really super inspiring. Really inspiring. Anybody else? Thank you so much. Thanks again.
Dorcas Street at the far side of town is traditionally said where the incident of the accidental shooting of the son, of Dorcas' son occurred, as that was called the bullet ground, where the militia would practice and train, and thus when they named the street, the thought of Dorcas's heritage and her son that was lost is perpetuated here. Thank you all. I would like to thank Colby Geyer for videoing our little presentation today. Please, if you feel up to it and are able, visit Dorcas's final resting place just a block away. And thank you. Have a safe journey home.